Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. I know it's been a while, but it seems that for whatever reason, these videos of me going over newly released products from Creative Assembly tend to be very popular and well received. So, I know I wasn't around for the Wood Elves one, but that's a long story in and of itself that we will get around to another time. But we have Bretonnia releasing 8 days from now, or no, 6 days. 6 days from now. Unless, of course, you have a account on Total War Access, which I believe is the forums, if I understood that correctly. Which, from what I have been told, if you have an account on Total War Access or whatever, they're going to give you the ability to essentially play Bretonnia a day early. So if you want to get your hands on Bretonnia on the 27th instead of the 28th, make sure you have an account on Total War Access. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start up this video. And most of you have probably already seen it. As per usual, we're just going to kind of go through the video and talk about things that I see that come up. I am very, very, very excited for Bretonnia. They are a much missed faction from Game 1. If I recall correctly, they're the final faction being added to Game 1, or final race, I should say. So here we have, I believe that's Duke Albric, based on the fact that he's got Bordelot markings all over him, and I believe he shares the same colors. Of course, there we've got the Lady of the Lake, who is the goddess of Bretonnia, who will be getting a video fairly soon, once Bretonnia is out. Of course, the woman that appears there is the Fey Enchantress, who is one of the other legendary lords for Bretonnia. And it's kind of like the prophetess, or the, that's a bad description because that's a character, but she's one of the, she's the religious leader of Bretonnia, which in Bretonnia basically means that she's in charge. Here we have an excellent Bretonnia city, of course, with lots of knights and peasants and stuff walking around. There is King Luan Leonkar himself, who of course is finally playable in the single-player campaign. Nice little siege here. There's not a whole lot of new stuff revealed in this video because they basically dropped the Steam page right with it. Probably the only really fascinating thing is I think I missed commenting on the Grail Relic. I know this majority of everyone nuts. There's of course the Green Knight, who just looks amazingly fantastic. I'm super excited to play with him. We'll talk about him in a little bit. There's not a whole lot revealed in this trailer that isn't available for information on the Steam page. Typically, the reason I would include the video is because it would often come out well before the faction did. So, like with the Wood Elves, you got the trailer, and then like a few weeks or something, days later, we often saw the Steam page released. So as for the screenshots, looking for anything that's particularly fascinating. If you're not aware, the Grail Relics are these... See if I can find a better picture. Ah, there's one. The Grail Relic, which a lot of people saw in the trailer and were really confused by, is what this is. And the Grail Relic is essentially a Grail Knight who dies, and a bunch of Grail Pilgrims swarm his corpse and take all of his stuff. And what they usually do is they kind of put him back together in this almost like marionette sense, where they have like pieces of his horse that they're holding up and stuff, and it looks like he's animated, but it's really just like 4 peasants carrying around. He's not undead or anything, like he's totally dead. And these pilgrims just carry him around like some sort of sacred artifact, and they fight as if he was alive. So the one who's holding the horse head will kick out and like hit people, and then the two on the sides will swing their shields and swords or whatever at people nearby. But what it functionally does is that it's a buff wagon. So the way it works in Total War, from what we see here, is that it's by itself. It's not part of a unit or anything like it is in Tabletop, but it's by itself, and it provides a lot of AoE buffs to people nearby. As for the other screenshots, of course we got trebuchets, which there's a new variant of called the Blessed Trebuchet, which I believe is the one that fires like the giant flaming boulders that you see in the videos. I imagine they do quite a bit of damage. Of course, we've got the new Royal Hippogriff Knights, which are right over here, which is a unit of riders who all are riding hippogriffs. I'm assuming they're probably not as powerful or tanky as a lord on a hippogriff, and they're probably a little bit smaller because they're probably more like junior or young hippogriffs. But still a really cool unit. Flying monstrous cavalry is a thing in Warhammer, but very, very few races have access to it, and if there's one race that deserved access to it, it was Bretonnia. And I'll talk a bit more about my thoughts on the expanded roster near the end of the video. Of course, here we have the Green Knight about to brutally murder some orcs. Very excited for him. He's going to be the first legendary hero for Total War Warhammer. Hopefully not the only one, but for right now he is. Let's see, they're just some kind of generic fighting video things, and looks like we got, you know, you got men-at-arms, battle pilgrims. I believe these are knights errant, I guess. They have lances, and Knights of the Realm and Grail Knights are already in the game, so I believe these are the knight errant pictures. Yeah, because there's Knights of the Realm, and then these guys have great swords, so those must be the questing knights. Look for anything else that's really new here. Men-at-arms, pilgrims, Grail relic, archers. I have been watching the streams and seeing them show off a lot of the new units, like some of the archer variants where they have like pox arrows, which are poisoned, and flaming arrows, which of course is a classic for Bretonnia. We'll also talk about this whole setup where you have to get the vows now for your characters, which is a really cool mechanic that I actually kind of like, even if it wastes skill points. Other than that, not a whole lot of exciting stuff. Bretonnia does look excellent and looks very well done. And of course, you've got the chivalry meter up here, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but I'm really excited for it. And from the gameplay I've seen and from what I've read, this is the peasant economy mechanic, which we will also talk about. So, that being said, let's go ahead and get this party started. So, of course, this is free LC. If you have Total War Warhammer, or if you decide to get Total War Warhammer at any point, Bretonnia, this entire faction, is completely and utterly free. You don't have to spend a single penny. There are 3 new campaigns being added, one for each legendary lord. Lewin Leoncoeur is Bretonnia, it starts in Cologne. Alberic is in Bordelot, and the Fey Enchantress is in Carcassonne, and they all represent their own faction. The new mechanics that are being really shown off are, of course, the chivalry meter, the peasant economy mechanic, and the vows. Summoning a legendary hero, being the Green Knight, excuse me, is right over here. A new roster, which we'll talk about later on, and of course the Errantry Wars in-game objective, which I've heard a little bit about. I haven't really seen it yet. But I'm not really going to read some of these descriptions just because you're all big boys or girls and you can do it yourself. We're really going to focus on talking about the things that are more concrete. The one thing I have seen is, so the chivalry meter, much like the grudge meter for the dwarves, has different tiers. And it seems that whenever you get a certain amount of chivalry, you go from one tier to tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5. And the different tiers, of course, provide you with different bonuses. But it also seems that for every tier you get, from what I understand, you get a point for summoning the Green Knight, I think is what it is. And when you summon him, he shows up like a hero on your campaign map, and he just like, you just use him like a regular hero, except for he's like super badass and has an amazing stat line and just wrecks face. And you have him for like a while before he vanishes. The Blessing of the Lady is probably one of my favorite new mechanics, which is that if you achieve a heroic victory in a battle, the entire army gets the Blessing of the Lady, which means every single unit in your army gets a ward save. But if your army routs during a fight, they lose it for the remainder of that fight, And if you refuse a battle, such as retreating from an attack, so like you right-click on an enemy army and you walk over to them and engage, and you see the balance of power bars really badly against you. If you're like, oh, never mind, you click retreat, you'll lose the blessing instantly. So it really encourages Bretonnia to be really aggressive and to not back down from a fight, which is what I really like. Of course, they also mention here that certain high-tier units, such as Girl Knights, will have the blessing as a unit trait by default, which I imagine means that they just always have the blessing of the lady, except for when they break in combat, because I think if you play custom battle with Bretonnia as it currently is, I imagine it's the same, staying the same, where if their leadership gets low and they break or rout, they lose the blessing. The peasant economy, another fascinating mechanic that I think really adds a really unique flavor to Bretonnia, is that you have access to a certain amount of peasants units, and whenever you build the right kinds of buildings, like I think farms, from what I saw on the stream, you get access to your maximum amount of peasants goes up. So like you build a farm and it adds like a couple peasant units. So the more farms you build, the more peasants you can put out. And farms bring you a lot of economy at the beginning of the game, because as it says here, if you don't want to have as many peasants, or you just want to go for industry, first of all, it doesn't give you access to more peasants, and second of all, at the beginning of the campaign, gives you less money. But as the campaign goes, you can purchase technologies from your research tree that will increase how much money you get from industry, and I'm guessing probably maybe 50, 100, or 150 turns into the campaign, when you've had enough time to do a lot of research, the industry will overtake that of the farms. So you kind of have to balance out this mechanic of like, the farms are really good for early game, plus they give you a lot of peasants, which probably have a really cheap upkeep, so that you're able to field like really big armies of really crappy troops. But if you want to make more in-game income, then you need to work on developing that industry, which Bretonnia doesn't really have going for it from a lore perspective, which is why it probably starts off really bad. The legendary lords for Bretonnia, of course, are Lewin Leoncoeur, who is the faction leader for Bretonnia, and he is melee focused. We're quite used to him. He's been available in custom battles for quite some time now. And I'm super excited to see him fully developed. Then you have the Fey Enchantress, who is the faction leader of Carcassonne. And she is, of course, your casting character. Excuse me. As a side note, before everyone makes the typical comments about how I yawn constantly in my videos, which must mean I'm tired, I found out that they have discovered, or it's known, that if you're not used to talking for long periods of time and you start talking a lot, you yawn, because your body, you don't take very good breaths when you're talking constantly, and so your body uses yawning as a way to make you slow down and take a deep breath. So I'm not tired, it's just I'm not used to talking constantly. Anyway, back to the point at hand. That was a stupid tangent. So the Fey Enchantress has the Lore of Life, which, like she does in Tabletop, is, I don't think she's a Loremaster in Tabletop, but they've made every freaking legendary lord a Loremaster, so I imagine she will be in this. And may be mounted on her unicorn, Silveron, who we saw in a screenshot up above. I'm hoping the unicorns are actually good. In Warhammer Fantasy, the unicorns are actually a little deceptively good, because A, they're surprisingly dangerous in close combat, and B, they often provide magic resistance. So hopefully they give that sort of thing. And then finally, the bit of a weird choice is Duke Albric of Bordelot, who they give a little bit of lore here for, and of course he has access to war horses, Pegasi, and hippogriffs, much like Leoncoeur. The thing about him that makes him such an interesting choice is that he is one of the only dukes that prior to Warhammer Fantasy, or prior to Total War Warhammer, has virtually no lore. Like, because he's a legendary lord, I'm going to make a video about him, but I'm not even kidding. I'm going to really struggle to make that lore video longer than like 10, 15 minutes. And the only reason it's going to be longer than 2 minutes is because I'm going to be using the lore that they provide for him in Total War Warhammer, because that's the only lore he has. Literally, if you read through the entire Bretonnia book, the only thing that exists about Duke Alberic is that he got really, like, embarrassed once because there was, like, a big festival, and I don't remember exactly why there was a festival, but there was some sort of festival, and he provided a bunch of alcohol to the peasants, and something ended up going wrong, and there was, like, a big riot because all the peasants were super drunk, and he was, like, really embarrassed about it, and it started a phrase where, if I recall correctly, the phrase is something like, as sober as a man is in Bordello, which is supposed to mean, like, yeah, like, it never happens, because everyone just thinks of them as drunkards because of that embarrassing incident. So let's move on to the new roster. So, Bretonnian armies can have lords or prophetesses as their general. Prophetesses come with lord beasts, heavens, or life. I really, really like that they're getting a casting lord for their armies. Really wish they would do that for Empire. I find it kind of shitty that, not that I want to take away from Bretonnia, but this means that the dwarves, greenskins, vampire counts, warriors of chaos, Bretonnia all have a casting lord and a fighting lord, essentially, as options. But the Empire and Beastmen do not. Beastmen only have one, and Empire only have one, which is really stupid. They need to fix that. Wizard Lords definitely need to be an option for the Empire. Well, I guess Empire has Arc Lectors now, but they definitely need a Wizard Lord for the Empire. I think it's absolutely silly that they don't. And Beastmen definitely need some love too. They either need Great Bray Shamans or Doom Bulls, one of the two. And of course, they have the new unique mechanic, which is the vows, which cost skill points that unlock at certain levels. Which I think a Knight's Vow is at level 1, Questing Vows later on, and Grail Vows much later on. And when you take these vows, they reduce the upkeep for knights associated with those vows. So a Knight's Vow would be like Knights Errant, Knights of the Realm. I think that's it. Maybe Pegasus Knights. And then Questing Vow would be pretty much just Questing Knights. And then the Grail Vow is your Grail Knights, your Grail Guardians, Royal... I think the Royal Knights, so the Royal Hippogriff Knights, the Royal Pegasus Knights, and all that stuff. So if you want to have an army that features a lot of knight units, these are skills you have to pick up, otherwise their upkeep is super expensive. Heroes, nothing really that new here. They've already had paladins and damsels. Of course, the damsels got some new lores. They have beasts, heavens, and life now instead of, I think, just heavens is what they used to be. So that's nice. I think Lord of Life is going to be a really good pick for Bretonnia most of the time for the prophetesses or the damsels. So is Lord Beasts. Because Life actually has anti-armor piercing spells. I think it's Shield of the Thorns and Regrowth. Provides you with defense against armor piercing. So if you want to run really good knight armies, that's something you probably want to look into. Alright, so let's move on to the unit roster, which includes a ton of new units. So melee infantry, you have the peasant mob, which I've seen on stream are literally just like a super garbage unit that just has a shitload of guys. And they are literally like, they're basically the equivalent of zombies. Foot Squires are a greatsword unit, but they're slightly worse. Well, they're a bit worse than actual greatswords. I'm really feeling like their purpose is only if either you just want a really infantry-focused army, because you don't like cav, then you're kind of going to need them. I think generally you shouldn't be playing Bretonnia if you don't like knights. Like, maybe you just want the Steam achievements or whatever. In which case, good for you, I guess. But the only thing I can really think of is that if you're coming up to a siege that's really difficult, you might need them if you want to take the walls, but I don't really think that's a unit I will take very often, if ever. Spearmen at arms with shields, nothing new there. Men at arms with shields, men at arms with pole arms, nothing new there. The Grail Relic, which we've already talked about, fantastic unit, provides AoE buff. It makes peasants actually, if I remember correctly from what I saw on stream, it actually makes peasants pretty decent. So if you run a peasant heavy army, you're definitely going to want one or two of these among them to provide those big AoE buffs and make your peasants just super awesome and improve their leadership. And Battle Pilgrims are, of course, the highest leadership of the peasant units and are pretty durable for as far as infantry goes for Bretonnia. But just keep in mind, this is Bretonnia, so if you're coming in here and expecting a balanced army and that you have okay infantry and okay cavalry, you are in the wrong neighborhood. You need to get out. This is an army that's all about the cav, and the infantry are just sort of there to tar pit people and hold them in place while your cav come around and smack into them. Ranged infantry, you have your peasant bowman with fire arrows, and your peasant bowman with pox arrows. The pox arrows are probably the only unit that I kind of raised my eyebrows at as a lore buff and was like, well, that's kind of stupid. Because, I mean, I know peasants are filthy, diseased degenerates, but at the same time, what are they doing to get pox arrows? Are they, stabbing them? Stabbing the sickest member of the unit with an arrow and then shooting it at people? Or, or are they, wiping it in dung or something? I'm not sure what the logic was behind giving Bretonnia poisoned arrows. I think it's a little lore-breaking, just because I honestly don't think peasants are that inventive, and Bretonnia's lords don't like to create strategies for ranged combat, because they consider it, unchivalrous and, below them and all that crap. So I'm not sure where this came from. Fire arrows are a classic for Bretonnia. And if you're fighting and now that the Wood Elves are in the game, fire arrows are actually really important, because if you go to war with the Wood Elves, you're really going to want these fire arrows against Treemen, Dorthu in particular, and Treekin. Especially since they're really durable and your cav can't just run them over. These are going to be crucial. It even applies to the likes of the vampire counts. The Terrorgeist and the Crypt Horrors are very vulnerable to fire arrows, and Trolls for Chaos and Greenskins are very vulnerable. So these are definitely a unit I would pick up in almost all of my Bretonnian armies. Pox arrows, poison's great. I'm just not a big fan. Especially since I feel like most of the time your peasant bowmen are going to be shooting either over or at an angle into combat that your cavalry are fighting in. Poison arrows make me nervous because I don't want to be hitting my own, because there's going to be friendly fire most of the time, and I don't want to hit my own guys with poison. Melee cavalry. The new units are the Knights Errant, which I have seen used on stream, and they're fantastic. They're just a really nice anti-infantry unit that just run people over, and they're very cheap, but they get the job done. Knights of the Realm. Oh, I should also add, if you're familiar with Bretonnia pre this release, peasant bowmen have been nerfed considerably. In custom battles, they used to be really, really good for how crappy they're supposed to be. They are actually crappy now, so you're going to need more of them or to be less dependent on them. Mounted Yeomen and Mounted Yeomen Archers are not new. That's old. So the new units are the Knights Errant, which we've already talked about. The Questing Knights, which are armor-piercing anti-infantry units that seem to be really good at, you throw them into melee against tough enemies, like Greatswords or Graveguard, or stuff like that, or Chosen, and they will just hold the line and busher people. So they're really tough, hard-hitting unit that's designed to grind. One thing that I noticed from the stream is that these two units, the Questing Knights and the Grail Guardians, which got a little bit of a Facebook feature today, is that they wield swords, and they do not have, if I recall correctly, I don't know for sure about the Grail Guardians, but I know for the Questing Knights, they don't have access to the lance formation, which has been added into the game. And I think I saw on stream that I think Bretonnia is the only person to have access to it. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I think that's the case. So, Bretonnia, you get access to the lance formation, which I saw on Reddit is plus a buttload to your charge speed. It increases your acceleration and your deceleration by a bunch. So it's going to be really good for getting your knights to like cut corners or running behind the enemy and cutting a sharp turn to charge right into them and having a lot of charge bonus damage. And the only units that seem to have access to that are units that have lances, which are the Knights Errant, the Knights of the Realm, and the Grail Knights. So I think a cool strategy is going to be like having Knights Errant or Knights of the Realm or Grail Knights be in lance formation, slam into an enemy unit to cause disruption and have all that charge bonus, and then right behind them you charge in your Questing Knights or your Grail Guardians who can't lance formation, but are much better at grinding, and have them slam in and just start grinding while you pull out your lance formation guys so they can keep cycle charging. For Flying Cavalry, Pegasus Knights are not new, but the new units are the Royal Hippogriff Knights and the Royal Pegasus Knights. Both look like absolutely fantastic units. I believe they're both Grail Val units, so they have magical attacks and really high stats and the Blessing of the Lady, which gives them a ward save. And they're just... Bretonnia is going to absolutely dominate the flying meta, I think. The only army that can even hope to compete with them is going to be the Vampire Counts. But I imagine these units, especially if they get the charge, like a Terror guy slamming into a unit of Royal Hippogriff Knights, or a unit of Var guys slamming into a unit of Royal Pegasus Knights, I imagine the Bretonnian units are going to come out on top almost every time. So they're going to be able to dominate the airway, and what I really like about these flying units is these give you access to cavalry that are not afraid of spearmen, because they can just go around them, or when your infantry engage, they can fly over them and then charge from the sky into their rear, cause tons of morale damage, cut them up, disengage, run out, cycle charge, so you're not getting stuck fighting halberdiers or spearmen or any of those things. And of course, the artillery, the field trebuchet, which is already pretty amazing. And they added in the Blessed Field Trebuchet, which to my understanding does magical damage, which is really significant, because what a lot of people don't realize about Total War Warhammer is that if something does magical damage on top of all of its other damage, that specific part of the damage goes up against your enemy's magical defense, which most units don't have, or it's not that great, which means when the Blessed Trebuchet hits, it's going to do a crap load of damage to most units because they don't have very good magic resist, and it's just gonna hurt. It's just gonna hurt so bad. But that's the Bretonnian roster. As for the new units, all of them I think are very flavorful. They add really well to the Bretonnian lore. And they're all units I would have expected to see in an 8th edition Bretonnian army book, which for the longest time we thought was coming, but, you know, obviously we know that's no longer the case. The only unit that I don't think makes a lot of sense is the Peasant Bowman with pox arrows, but maybe there's some, like, real-world equivalent they pulled that from. Personally, I feel like they just wanted to give them poison attacks for some reason. I don't feel like it was necessarily a decision that came from the lore or from the actual real-world equivalents that the Bretonnia is kind of based off of tactically. I don't think there's anybody in France or whatever who was infamous for like using diseased or gross arrows. But in any event, Bretonnia seems like a really fascinating faction. The peasant economy, I really like that you have to kind of mingle this balance between like getting enough peasants in your army to form an effective shield wall to protect your trebuchets and your archers, and to make sure that you can engage the enemy so that their flanks and rears are exposed to your cav, so that your cav can run around and just slam into them and do tons of damage. I also really like the idea of having lots of trash infantry, but there's a lot of ways to kind of like buff them, especially like the Grail Relic and with the prophetesses or damsels. Because peasants are pretty bad, but I imagine if you like popped a big Wizen's Wild Form on them, they actually might be surprisingly okay. Other than that, I'm not like really surprised by any of the new units. I think honestly though, with Bretonnia, you're probably going to see a lot of really fascinating strategies around mixed armies. I don't think there's going to be a lot of pure knight armies, but I also don't think there's going to be pure peasant armies, just because peasants are garbage. And knights, if you take all knights, It might be possible to win just through sheer like amount of cycle charges you can pull off and stuff. But in multiplayer, you're probably not going to be able to have enough to outpace enemy range shooting and the typical spearman blocks. So I'm going to be really interested to see how the Bretonnian meta develops. But I think them having access to 3 really powerful flying cav units is going to help that a lot. Other than that, there's not too much more to add to this. I think Bretonnia is going to be a really solid faction. I'm trying really hard to get media access so that I can stream and make videos of Bretonnia early for you guys, just to get out some opinions. But we'll see how that goes. Other than that, I hope you're all having a great day. I'm very, very excited for Bretonnia, and I think they're going to be an excellent way to cap off Game 1 as far as factions are concerned. I do have a lot of hopes about the Game 1 not being finished yet. I hope there's a lot more, not a lot more, but I hope there's some more DLCs and free LCs and other stuff to go for this game, at least until summer, if not beyond. That being said, I want Game 2 to hurry up and get here. I'm going to be really sad if Game 2 is not released in 2017. But if they're going to release it this year, they're probably going to have to announce it in March at the latest. In any event, I hope you all have a great day. I'm probably not going to talk that much about Isabella von Karstein. I'm just going to put a note here saying that I'm really glad we won Make War Not Love, which if you're not aware, you weren't keeping up with that or don't know what I'm talking about, there was a little event Sega put on that Total War Warhammer won, and because of that, everyone, just like with Bretonnia, is getting Isabella von Karstein as a free Legendary Lord, and her and Vlad are their own new faction now called the von Karstein faction, whose starting location is in Swartzhofen, right next to Castle Drakenhof. So there's a new vampire faction in the game, which is always good news. And that being said, the vampire counts have so many freaking legendary lords compared to everybody else. It's just bonkers. I feel like the Empire really needs some love at this point. But outside of that, Isabella is being added to the game. She looks super fun. If you're someone that's really fond of running lots of heroes in your armies, she gives a shitload of buffs to vampires in her army and makes them really scary. So like her whole spiel is you're supposed to run her with like 2 or 3 vampire heroes in your army, and she like buffs them up, and she actually gives you early access to them as well. She has a unique building that they showed that if she takes Castle Drakenhof, it's a tier 1 building that gives you access to vampire heroes and gives them plus like a billion ranks. So if you're really fond of vampires, she is the lord for you. But her and Vlad being in their own faction is great. I always thought it was kind of stupid that Vlad was not a... Vlad's just too big of a character to not be a leader of his own faction. So I'm really glad to see the von Karsteins are making their own faction away from Manfred, who most certainly would refuse to bow down to Vlad. So I'm glad you can actually have the two of them clash and fight on the campaign now. I think they also announced that Undead can confederate now, so which they weren't able to before. So if you're playing vampire counts or von Karsteins, you can confederate with one another, and you can confederate with Mazzillion. So it's actually possible to get the Red Duke as one of your characters if you manage to confederate with the French vampires. But in any event, that's pretty much it for now. More stuff to come. I'm working on the Wood Elves Part 3, and it's almost done. It's not gonna take a year like Part 2 did. So I hope you all are having a great day, and I will see you guys on the verdant fields of Bretonnia in just a few days. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day. Bye.